Welcome to the esynergy podcast, conversations that cut through the hype and get to the things that really matter. I'm Andy Bolt. I'm the head of cloud and platform engineering at esynergy. I'm joined today by Lee Provoost, who's the CTO at Flagstone. We're going to talk about something Lee shared at Lead Dev a few months ago about his personal journey through a major replatforming and migration piece of work at Flagstone. The things that he learned and the challenges and the things that shaped him as a person, the person he is today. Lee and I have known each other for a long time, about 10 years now. We've worked together on a couple of things, so I was there for some of this, and it was certainly a journey. Lee, welcome. Great to have you here.
Hi, Andy.
Introduce yourself and who Flagstone is and why this was important to them.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andy. Thank you for having me. So Flagstone is a cash savings platform. So any person, any company can sign up, create one account, and then have access to over 60 different bank products. And that means that they don't need to worry about signing up lots of different accounts or different banks and speak to their client services. We manage all of that complexity for our clients.
And one login, 60 savings accounts, I think, or 60 banks with savings accounts, isn't it? So it's a great service. The replatforming and migration piece of work that happened. You talked about this at Lead Dev. One of the things you call out early on in that discussion is a distinction between tech debt, which I'm sure everybody listening to this is very familiar with, and commercial debt, which is a slightly different take on things. What do you mean by commercial debt?
Yeah, so Flagstone is a business that's been around for 10, 11 years. And as with many businesses, especially in the early years, people build prototypes, proof concepts, and often with the intention to try things out. But as we all know, quite often those prototypes become production systems and become quite business critical. So I think over the years, we've built an internal platform to manage the cash savings products on behalf of our clients. And the two founders, Andrew and Simon, as any founder would do in the early days, went through that hustle phase where they were signing deals, they were signing partnerships, signing clients. And that usually means that you make sacrifices and you agree to certain bespoke terms and conditions. You promise to build or deliver something in order to win a particular type of client or partner. But of course, over the years, those small customizations, those bespoke terms and conditions start adding up. And at some point, you come to the realization that all this customization is actually holding you back as a business. And I think what I found is that as an industry, we talk a lot about technical debt and to an extent about product debt, certain product decisions we either deliberately or sometimes accidentally make that sometimes hold back products or create a negative experience for clients. And we don't talk enough about the business decisions that we've been making in the past. For instance, having a very big set of bespoke interest payment frequencies for clients, or having bespoke landing pages for every single partner, regardless whether they have 5 clients or 5,000 clients on the platform with us. So that was for me one of the biggest eye-openers of the replatforming project we've done.
And this was a big consideration, right? If you recall correctly, it was broken down into 10 main phases to help deal with some of that commercial debt. And let's be honest, what you're talking about is no different. I think you said it yourself. It's no different to the decisions that any startup is making, where in those early days, it's about survival and gaining customers and making sure you can keep going as a business. And that adds up until later on, where if you haven't paid that debt down, it's harder, it's more difficult. And that led into this 10-phase approach. And one of the key things I think you said as well was saying to the business, to your colleagues on the senior leadership team, the rest of the C-suite, that any decision we make is not set in stone. It's a two-way process. That was key, wasn't it, to getting the buy-in?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that everyone, including myself, remember all the horror stories of big IT projects, big platform rebuilds, both in financial services, but also in the wider industry. So it was very firmly in the back of my mind that this was not going to be easy, right? And it is. I class it as one of those high risk, high reward type of projects. But the way we've approached this was, first of all, de-risk as much as possible up front. So we spent 3 months with a very core group of people intimately understanding the problem and trying to avoid that it is this all or nothing project. And so we looked into, well, how can we break it up, right? We know what the starting point is and where we need to finish. But what was clear is that not everything needed to be done at day one. Not all problems needed to be solved at day one. And as you kind of alluded to, it wasn't a type of project where you start and you can't pause or you can't change your mind. And that was, I think, part of the reason why the rest of the senior leadership team and the board was supportive is we had a way to pause things, or we had a way to change our mind. And the fact that it didn't feel like it was a all or nothing type of thing for the organization definitely helped with selling that idea to the rest of my SLT peers. Yes.
I mean, we know that the project at the end of the day was a success. Every customer was migrated successfully, got over the line. You talk about that it's quite an emotional moment when that final customer got moved over. Was there ever a point where you thought, or the team thought, we can't go any further? We're gonna have to pull on that red cord and make that decision happen. Where, okay, we're going to leave this set of customers where they are and not roll back, but kind of stop here. We've done as much as we can. We'll let these other customers carry on as they are. Did you ever reach a point where that was the case, or where that was considered?
There were definitely moments where I felt this is probably where we should stop and either just pause or just leave it as is. And the way we designed this migration and replatforming allowed us as a business to actually make that decision if we really wanted to. Now, making that decision would have come with a cost, right? Running two platforms comes with a cost. Running two platforms meant that it caused a detrimental kind of impact on our internal operations, on our client services team, on our bank partners. So it wasn't for free, but it was possible. And so there were moments where I personally thought maybe this is as far as we can go. It's the classic 80-20 type of problem where you're 80% in the project and not realizing that 80% of the complexity sits right in that final 20%. And this was definitely one of those projects where that was true. And but what we have done, we had a few times where we paused the project for a couple of weeks because it was important that we sometimes reflected on. So rather than continuously trying to solve particular problems and not making progress, sometimes you benefit from saying, why don't we just pause this for a couple of weeks and regroup and then go at it again? And so we've done that a couple of times. And it was both for, I think, our own personal well-being, because it was quite stressful from time to times, but also sometimes certain problems do require time to solve.
Yeah, of course. And I guess as well, that gives you the time, instead of getting stuck in that spiral that engineers often get into without realizing, which is, I'm just one more fix away from fixing this and we'll be able to move on. It gives you the time to sit back and think, are you really one fix away, or is it going to need a bit more work? I remember you said 80-20 rule. I think one of the pauses that I remember, it was around 84% and hit that really tricky last 20%. And I remember that was quite a big time for reflection. So, I mean, this was towards the end of the project where you had that agility in place. And at the beginning of the project, it was different, right? I think the project team, the words you used where it felt like they were walking through treacle. They were asking for help and support from other parts of the business and having to sit and wait for answers. It was It's kind of I need to know this thing about this type of customer or this financial agreement we've got in place with this particular bank. Can you please tell me? But it was taking time to get those answers. How did you deal with that?
I think one of the biggest learnings for me running this project was things move faster when you have all the right attention from everyone on the project. And there were, I think, two big examples of this. So the first one was we started a project where we had multiple teams involved, where some teams were um, building capabilities, so almost like they were building the railroad network, whilst the other team was building the train set that were going on that railroad network. And we initially started with appointing various teams across the business and asking them, can you build these capabilities for us? But you do realize that people have also their own priorities, their own goals. And so one of the things we had to do was do a reset and say, why don't we bring all those people together under one executive of the SLT, and that person has the single authority to make decisions on priorities and how we move forward. So that was definitely a game changer for us. And then further down the project, and that was actually one of the suggestions from our CEO, who saw that at some point we were going through that treacle where you felt like every day is a battle trying to solve problems. And the moment you solve the problem, there were like 3, 4, 5 more problems popping up. And the thing that slowed us down massively was there were lots of questions that we had. And everyone was helpful, everyone was supportive. But again, people have their day jobs. And so what the CEO suggested is that during certain peak moments where the treacle was really, really difficult, we bring them together for a search sprint. So whether it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we hand-picked people from client services, onboarding, compliance across the business, put them physically with the core migration replatforming team. And it meant that when an engineer had a particular question about, I seem to bump into this data problem for this client, why is that? Then literally next to that person was someone from the client services team who could look at the data and say, oh, yes, that's because of this reason, and we can fix it. And it takes 5 seconds to fix this, rather than before. What happened was they were then asking either the project manager, who then went to the head of the client services team. They were trying to find someone, then it came back. And so before you knew it, then there was often a 24, 36 hour cycle of delay. And having those search sprints where we brought those people together meant that 36 hours were reduced to maybe minutes in turnaround time.
So in a way, you were kind of doing. Everybody talks about doing a multifunctional team being the right way to deliver any project, but in a way, you're very flexible with what that multifunctional team looked like. You're bringing in the right people at the right time. I guess in a way, almost doing a bunch of mini discoveries throughout the project to understand. Well, okay, how does this next piece need to work? Did you run this as an agile project?
We definitely started with the intention to have this as a full agile project following all the best practices. But you come quite quickly to the realization that your starting point is quite well known, your end point is quite well known, and it's also quite well known what you need to achieve to make this happen. Now, what you don't know is some of the interdependencies, how big some of the problems are, how complex they are, and there are a whole bunch of unknown unknowns as well. So we quickly came to the realization that this is a waterfall project. However, we created agility by um, carving out a problems domain in lots of small chunks, and then the agility came from, being able to move those around. And the way we define those chunks is client segments with particular characteristics. So you could have particular individual clients versus corporate clients. But an individual client can be a direct Flagstone client, or they can be a client coming through a wealth advisor. And you have so many different permutations of different characteristics. And we broke down all those different segments along those various different lenses and characteristics. And that meant that the agility came from, well, we can solve this problem today, that unlocks that other problem. And we were planning to then solve B, C, D, E, but actually it makes more sense to move that around. So I think it was more agility and an agile mindset, but firmly within a waterfall project.
And I think even the most pure of agile people would have to accept that agile says actually you take the pieces that work and you make them work for you. And I think definitely managed to achieve that on this case. A couple of times we kind of touched on this. This got difficult at times. At times it felt a bit wading through treacle. It was hard to get answers. Even when you had those answers and the right people in place, there were difficult problems to solve. And it's hard work. Now, I remember a few times seeing you being very supportive of the team. And sometimes down in the trenches, it's easy to forget, though, that the leaders in the business need some support as well. So how did you handle getting support for yourself?
Yeah, this is something I talked about on the Lead Dev event as well. And a big learning for me, it was um, the concept of a first team. And intellectually, I knew of the existence of a first team because I've heard about it, I've read about it, but I've never, I think, properly experience what it actually means. And so, one of the things I remind my senior tech leadership team is that my first team isn't that group. It's the rest of my peer group on the senior leadership team. And the way I managed the project and got the support was very much by leaning on my peers in the senior leadership team, and quite often be quite open and vulnerable and just be honest and say, you know what, I'm really struggling with this. I need some help. There is a particular compliance problem that is holding us back. And then you had Francesco, Chief Compliance Officer. Let's have a chat. And you then realize that quite often problems that feel unsurmountable can often be solved in 5 minutes, because sometimes the business accepts, let's make an exception, or let's change the process, or realize, you know what, we don't actually need this.
So that support from the first team is really important. And I think it's something that everybody should keep in mind, is having that first team around you is whatever level of the business you're at, it's important to have people you can rely upon. Thank you for all of that. That was really helpful. It's really insightful. It was definitely a journey for us all, and for yourself in particular. I know you learned a lot on a personal level throughout this, because we were talking quite regularly.
Yeah.
Before we close, we always like to end with a simple but profound question. In one sentence, what's the one piece of advice you wish every business leader understood?
Look after yourself first. It's one of the mistakes I've made, is focus on supporting the team first and foremost, and then forgetting about myself. And it's like on a plane, right, where they say, put your own oxygen mask on first before you help others. So that would be the one thing I would share with everyone, is make sure you look after your own well-being.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Lee, it's always a pleasure. This has been a real pleasure. Thank you for sharing those insights and your thoughts and the things you learned along the way on this particular project with us. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andy.